Hello and welcome to Economics Live. The question today is, why is it so difficult to find somewhere to live? It's prompted by a report in Newsweek yesterday that a survey by LendingTree found that 27% of Gen Z respondents expressed concern that a recession would result in the loss of their housing. In comparison, only 23.4% of millennials said the same. The report continues. The heightened anxiety among Gen Z speaks to how younger Americans, many of whom are just beginning their financial independence, are grappling with high rent, stagnant wages, and rising costs of living. The housing affordability crisis has been a pressing issue in recent years, and these findings suggest that Gen Z may be disproportionately vulnerable to economic downturns. Meanwhile, in the UK, a leading think tank called Centre for Cities reports that the UK's chronic housing shortage is one of the biggest economic and social challenges the country faces. The government is aiming to build 1.5 million homes over the Parliament in England, but barely 200,000 were built in 2023-24. So what's the problem? How might it be resolved? After all, everyone needs a place to live. You would have thought that the first priority of a just and efficient economy, after making sure everyone has enough food, would be to ensure that they have somewhere to live. My name is Ian Mason, and Economics Live is a weekly broadcast from the School of Philosophy and Economic Science, where we study and teach practical philosophy and economics with justice. Between them, these two core subjects try to bring a sense of justice and equity to bear on social and economic affairs. The first thing is to state the obvious, because its implications are not always so obvious. Every dwelling has two basic components to which different considerations apply. There's always the building itself, and also the land it's built on. Although they're often considered as one and the same thing, the difference is clear from the fact that land is a non-renewable and indestructible part of nature that cannot be significantly increased or diminished by human effort. Whereas houses are built by human hands and can be multiplied or destroyed at will. But with rare exceptions, they can only be built on land. What both economies, Britain and the US, also have in common is that land ownership and distribution are left to a free market. This has inherent problems, because a free market is only possible when certain conditions are met. One is that people are free to enter or leave the market at will. Another is that supply can readily respond to increased demand so that prices can be competed down until an equilibrium between supply and demand is reached. Neither of these conditions can apply to a market in land. No one is free to choose whether or not to have somewhere to live. A place to live is as essential to human life as air, water, and food. Even the most sophisticated economy cannot free people from those requirements. Secondly, as Mark Twain is reputed to have observed, the thing about land is that they don't make it anymore. Property rights and planning laws can, of course, restrict the amount of land available for housing and cause fluctuations in supply. But these almost invariably work to the benefit of existing landlords or landowners. And everywhere you look, you'll find that the land is owned by someone with power to charge others for access to it. This is the stranglehold of property rights that makes it possible to hold whole generations of people to ransom. And the ransoms are paid with the aid of private finance from the banking system. This too, in Britain and the US, is supposed to be regulated primarily by a free market. But again, the core conditions do not apply. People have to live somewhere, and if they want to buy somewhere, they have to have finance. They can only get it from licensed financial institutions who set the terms and are only too eager to lend money, secured against title to the property to be bought, of course, and attracting regular payments of interest, which are always and everywhere a drain on the resources of the buyer. If they can't buy, they're forced to rent or remain dependent on families or friends who have room for them. The financial institutions also compete for customers, which means that there's constant pressure to loosen lending criteria, the central one being multiples of salary. At present in the UK, some institutions are offering loans based on 5 times annual salary. This in turn increases competition for the limited supply of available housing or housing land, creating a seller's market that makes housing more and more expensive. Hence the constant rise in house prices and the equally constant increase in despair at ever being able to buy one. The reality is a colossal instance of what is called market failure. It's obvious that there's no free market solution to the housing crisis. The only possible conclusion is that the provision and distribution of housing in a sophisticated economy requires careful regulation directed at both the responsibilities of land ownership itself and also at the terms on which finance is available. So how do we make it easier to find somewhere to live? On the supply side, to make land as freely available for housing as possible, the first thing to tackle is the widespread practice of land banking. That is, of buying land and holding it out of use in the expectation of increases in value over time. In Ireland, for example, there's a 3% annual levy on vacant sites zoned for housing. At least, if it can't use the land, the public gets the revenue. It really needs to be understood that, given the universal need for people to live on land, holding it out of use for purely private gain is morally and economically unacceptable. On the demand side, the most immediate target has to be the terms of provisions of loans. There should be an immediate freeze on permissible salary multiples, followed by a gradual reduction. This would reduce the effective demand, which in turn would bring prices down and eventually back within the range of ordinary working young people. The two, moderating demand and increasing supply, have to go hand in hand. This will not be popular, of course, with those who already own property, or with a banking system that is underpinned by high property prices. But the nettle needs to be grasped sooner or later, because the system of ever-increasing prices and fewer people able to pay them is unsustainable. The alternative is a market collapse that could be even worse than 2008. There are, of course, other measures that would help. And I'm aware that I've not even touched on the rental sector, where the same considerations apply. But I've said as much as I have time for today. Justice in economics is not always easy. And these suggestions may seem outrageous to some people. But what is really outrageous and unjust is to be in this situation at all. The politics of getting out of it may be extremely difficult, but the economics is simple enough. Thank you for listening. And if you want to know more about the school or about economics with justice or our courses and events, go to www.schoolofphilosophy.org. So farewell for now.